Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Truth and Liberty. So glad to have you joining the show today. Before we get started, I wanted to encourage you all to make plans now to attend the Truth and Liberty Conference, September 11th, 12th, and 13th in Woodland Park on the campus of Charis Bible College. Charlie Kirk is going to be speaking, along with Congressman our local congressman here, Pastor Lorenzo Sewell, and many others. It's going to be a phenomenal event that you won't want to miss. Probably 50 or more exhibitors in our exhibit hall, some incredible workshops that are going to train and equip you to stand for truth for your families and in the public square. It's going to be a great time. Check it out on our website at truthandliberty.net. And while you're there, I want to ask, are you a subscriber to Truth and Liberty? Do you get our emails and our newsletters? If not, you can subscribe on our website. Just click subscribe, share your email address and name with us, and you'll start getting in your inbox all sorts of helpful and encouraging information, blog posts, articles, action alerts, and more to help you be effective as we together work to turn America back to God. Folks, it's been 6 months since Donald Trump was inaugurated, and I want to take some time in today's episode to talk about some of his accomplishments and successes and how he's doing. Frankly, Donald Trump has been on a roll. The last 2 weeks of June through July, where we are today, have seen just a string of successes and accomplishments, beginning with Trump's signature of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a huge piece of legislation that will change the tax structure in America, that will end funding of Planned Parenthood from a federal level in our country, that will reforms Medicaid for years to come, to make it more finely tuned to accomplish what it's intended to accomplish. How is Trump doing on other fronts? Well, I want to share with you a graphic that was published in a recent edition of the New York Post that shows his many successes over the last few weeks, beginning on June 21st when the United States successfully launched a military attack against nuclear facilities in the nation of Iran, the bunker buster bombs that incapacitated Iran's nuclear ambitions. June 23rd, Donald Trump, or the Supreme Court, decided that Donald Trump or his administration could actually deport illegal immigrants to third-party nations. June 25th, NATO leaders actually agreed to double and in some cases triple their own expenditures on defense in their nations. A huge victory, something Trump has been calling for years. June 27th, the Supreme Court ruled that lower federal courts can no longer issue national injunctions, nationwide injunctions. We're not going to have this anymore in our country. The 29th, Canada scrapped a tax that it had imposed on digital services, on America's corporate digital companies and stuff. A huge success. On July 1st, the University of Pennsylvania said, you know what, it was wrong for us to let Leah Thomas, a biological male, swim in the female swimming championship. So they stripped him of that title that rightfully belonged to Riley Gaines. That same day, Paramount settled the lawsuit with Donald Trump for that election interference and so forth, paying him $16 million. July the 2nd, new data showed that the Border Patrol detained only 6,000 people at the southern border. In other words, only 6,000 people illegally crossed the southern border. That's down from over 200,000 a month in the Biden administration. Essentially a closed border. July the 2nd, Donald Trump announced a trade deal with Vietnam, who's in the top 20 U.S. trading partners. July the 3rd, who can forget the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act? And then that same day, a positive jobs report comes out showing that the U.S. economy added 147,000 jobs in the month of June, and that unemployment dropped to 4.1%. The Dow went through the roof. And this is just the beginning, folks, as the successes have continued on. In the last few months, we saw the United States Supreme Court rule in favor of Texas. that state governments have the power to require porn websites to restrict access only to people who can prove that they're over the age of 18. Pornhub has decided to pull out of states that are doing this because it's too risky and difficult for them to do. A massive benefit to our culture. The Supreme Court also lifted an injunction on against Donald Trump's administration banning the layoff of federal government employees. That was on July the 10th. And on it goes. So here's what I want to say. The rest of my monologue today and the rest of this show, you might want to grab a notepad, because what I want to do is dive into more detail. The one big beautiful bill, biblical values, worldview, immigration, world peace, and more, to just drive home and help you understand the magnitude of what Donald Trump is accomplishing. Now, he's not had all success and he's not finished yet, but what is going on is absolutely amazing. This one big beautiful bill, for example, cuts cuts the deficit anywhere from $1 trillion to $6 trillion. Medicaid reform of $1.7 trillion over 10 years, with injecting a work requirement. Able-bodied individuals have to work in order to recover Medicaid. Not a hard, it's a common sense reform, but will save hundreds of millions of dollars. No funding for Planned Parenthood. That's $200 million a year to Planned Parenthood that is now going to be saved. The border wall, funding for the border wall, it's going to be constructed now. The Iron Dome, $25 billion to erect a missile defense system over the United States. Opening federal land to energy exploration, and the famous tax cuts. Making the 2017 restructuring of the tax code permanent. Also, no tax on overtime, no tax on tips. That's going to help who? Not the rich and famous, guys. That's going to help the working class. Larger personal deductions. Everybody's going to get a $1,000 increase in their personal deduction. Seniors are with moderate income are going to get a $4,000 per person personal deduction, which equates to no tax on Social Security, an increased deduction for state and local income tax that we pay. You get to deduct that from your federal taxes now up to $10,000 per person per year. Child tax credit increase, child savings accounts, car loan interest deduction, and on and on. I don't know about you, but this doesn't sound like tax breaks for the 1%. It sounds like tax breaks for average Americans. Now, if we look at biblical values and worldview, what Trump has accomplished in 6 months is just amazing. All these issues, economic issues, have biblical values under them. But what I want to talk about now are things like freedom of religion, abortion, DEI, radical trans and LGBT ideology, and education. Abortion. Right off the bat, the Donald Trump administration said, we're going to follow the Mexico City policy, and foreign aid cannot go for the purposes of abortion. They've enforced the Hyde Amendment in federal legislation. We're not going to fund actual abortions. Now, what I mentioned earlier, stripping Planned Parenthood of Medicaid funding, is strictly speaking not abortion funding. It's funding other services that Planned Parenthood does. But we know that if you fund part of Planned Parenthood, what you're doing is enabling them to pursue their main mission, which is abortion. And all those health services they supposedly provide are available at 5 times as many other nonprofit entities around the country. So it's not really going to hurt women seeking health care. The one big beautiful bill, like I mentioned, strips them of that funding. And we could go on and on. But let's look at DEI and the LGBT ideology. Donald Trump has issued a slew of executive orders in his first 100 days alone. You can see on the graph here that's coming on the screen that Donald Trump in his first 100 days issued like 3 times as many executive orders. I think it was 148 compared to Joe Biden's 42. And then we have even 3 times as many as in his first term. In addition, in the first 100 days, Donald Trump repealed 78 executive orders that Joe Biden had enacted, and now it's even over 100. And so one of the most important ones was from day one. He said the official policy of the United States is there are only two genders, male and female. And so no federal act, no federal policy that recognizes more than two genders is going to remain on the books, is going to be allowed anymore. He has eliminated DEI from the federal government. This is absolutely huge. All federal government hiring decisions will now be based on merit and performance, not on subjects like race and gender and sexual orientation and all this other stuff. We're gonna get that out of our government. No more grants to colleges and universities and others based on DEI criteria. No funding of DEI offices. No more boys playing in girls' sports if federal funding is connected to it. That's why we see the University of Pennsylvania announcement about Leah Thomas. And he's also gutted the USAID. He's in the process of that. Now, the courts have blocked him here and there, but USAID, you remember the list of grants that came out of all this stuff, all this LGBT stuff, condoms in the Gaza Strip, all these programs of left-wing origins and stuff around the world, not helping the poor, not trying to teach people how to have successful businesses and things like that, to help people pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But no, this leftist, Marxist, LGBT garbage indoctrination, well, we're cutting that off, and that is nothing but good news. And I mentioned the Supreme Court decision on porn websites. You know, porn is an epidemic in the United States today. It's a billion-dollar industry. It is destroying marriages and families. It's bringing people into all forms of sexual addiction and perversion. So this is really good news, a major step forward that came out of the Supreme Court, backing that Texas law requiring porn websites to allow only adults online. How about freedom of religion? The Supreme Court just decided recently the case of Mahmoud versus Taylor, holding that parents have the right to notice and to opt out of teaching in public schools that is contrary to their religious convictions, because parents have a fundamental right to raise their children and teach their children the religious beliefs that they believe in. And this decision is going to have far-reaching implications for parental rights in education. And furthermore, the Internal Revenue Service just entered into a settlement in a case in the Eastern District of Texas, holding that the infamous Johnson Amendment, that's the provision in the tax code that says 501c3s cannot endorse or oppose candidates. They just agreed on the record that this amendment, the Johnson Amendment, does not apply to churches in traditional ministry. So pastors, you are 100% free now under the law, under federal law, to endorse candidates or oppose candidates from the pulpit. That means you can tell your congregation, according to the Bible, according to biblical values, who they should vote for and who they shouldn't vote for. A powerful right that has been in existence since the beginning of our nation, but is now being restored. In the education arena, what has Donald Trump accomplished so far? Well, he is effectively dismantling the Federal Department of Education as such. The funding for legitimate programs is still going to exist, but we are returning control to the states and to local communities where control belongs, which is going to, I think, enhance greatly the quality of education. Plus, removing DEI from all funding initiatives and other policies is going to return the emphasis where it ought to be on math and science and reading and all these other things, which is why we send our kids to schools in the first place. That's going to help our country tremendously. Economy and trade. Well, the tariffs have been in the news a lot. Did you know that Trump's administration has collected almost $100 billion so far this year in tariffs alone? That's a 100% increase over the same time last year under the Biden administration. Trade talks are progressing with Canada. He's got trade deals in principle with the United Kingdom, one with Vietnam. I believe there are many that are coming that are in the works now. And, you know, the fearmongers said this is going to drive up inflation because we're going to have to pay more for our goods and services. It has had had virtually no measurable effect on inflation, as inflation is now down to 2.3%. It was at the lowest level under Biden. It was 3%, and it's down to just a little over 2% under the Donald Trump administration. The economy, trillions and trillions of dollars in new investments have been pledged and are underway in the United States from corporations as big as Apple, Nvidia, SoftBank, and many, many more. Wage growth. Blue-collar wages, people that work by the hour, are up to the highest level in 60 years. You can see on the chart here that there has been a major increase of 1.7% in these first 6 months of the Trump administration. Under Biden's full term, they were down 1.7% for the whole term. In the first 6 months of Trump, blue-collar wages are up 1.7%. Unemployment down to 4.1%. And as I mentioned before, hundreds of thousands of new jobs. And so the chart that I want to show you next, this is has to do with let me look at it here. This is monthly inflation rates. You can see that it peaked during the Biden administration in September 2021 through all the way through 2024, and under Trump, it's just continuing to head in a downward trajectory. So that is incredible news. How about immigration? Also in the news all the time is the deportation efforts, really what we should say is the law enforcement efforts of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Bureau of the United States. Border crossings down to a trickle, the lowest recorded from the peak of over 200,000 a month under the Biden administration. The Supreme Court saying, yes, Trump can detain illegal immigrants. Yes, Trump can deport them, and that he has the power to deploy the National Guard if necessary to restore peace. The Lincoln-Riley Act passed, which, in the name of the girl that was murdered by an illegal immigrant, deportations of 139,000 illegal aliens thus far, and this number is only going to rise. And so it really represents the restoration of national sovereignty over our borders, enabling our communities and law enforcement to keep our communities safe, and the restoration of the rule of law in our country. It is an incredible development. On the subject of world peace, of course, we know there is no such thing as world peace until the Lord himself returns and establishes his kingdom. But we, as his agents on the earth, can do a lot to bring about peace in our time. And one of the most important areas, the greatest trouble spot, is the Middle East. And, Donald Trump in his first term and now again is doing more to establish peace in the Middle East than anyone ever thought possible. With the Abraham Accords, peace treaties between Israel and other Arab nations, he's strengthening and supporting Israel in its war on Hamas and Hezbollah, two terrorist organizations, and supporting them as they bring those organizations to their knees and expel them and disable them from killing and murdering innocent Israelis. He attacked Iran's nuclear facilities and has disabled them. There's now, not World War III as the liberals predicted, but instead a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. Lebanon just announced that it is going to actively disarm Hezbollah. And Hezbollah has been operating in Lebanon for 50 years, tormenting and attacking Israel, one of the main terrorist organizations in the world. Lebanon is going to get on the bandwagon of bringing that to an end and reestablishing the sovereignty of the Lebanese government. Of course, Hezbollah was a proxy of Iran and basically ruled southern Lebanon. Trump has some goals that are still pending. We have yet to see peace in the Ukraine. The Gaza war is continuing onward. We need to see some trade deals. Those are coming, I believe. Election reform, lower interest rates. Of course, those are not under his direct control. That's the Federal Reserve that controls that. But we are making incredible progress on these things, folks. If this is what we're going to see accomplished in the first 6 months of his administration, what are we going to see in the next year and a half? I believe it is transformational, and it's clearing the deck. It's resetting the table, setting it for prosperity and success and a restoration of biblical values and truth and the principles of America's founding at a level that we haven't seen probably ever in the modern era, certainly. And here to talk about this, Donald Trump's accomplishments, is my new friend, Amanda Head. Amanda is the host of Furthermore with Amanda Head, a podcast which everybody needs to check out. And also, she is the White House correspondent for Just the News. You can find her articles and everything on justthenews.com. She's also the co-host of Just the News No Noise, which you can watch every weekday at 6 p.m. on Real America's Voice. And so Amanda Head is going to be joining me in just a minute and a half here. And so we're going to share a little bit of information with you. Don't go away. I'll be right back with a fantastic interview with the chief White House correspondent for Just the News. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. All right, folks, welcome back to Truth and Liberty. As I mentioned, our very special guest today is Amanda Head, the White House correspondent for Just the News. And I'm just really honored to have Amanda joining us on Truth and Liberty today. Now, Amanda, thanks for coming on the show, first of all.
I am delighted to be here. I'm so glad we can make this work.
Yeah, and full disclosure, your father-in-law happens to be a friend of mine. We went through Charis Bible College close to the same time period, and so we've got that connection, but it's really good to have you joining us. Now, Amanda, you're the White House correspondent for Just the News. That means you're covering the White House day in and day out. And I just want our folks to get to know you a little bit. How did you make your way into that amazing position? Is your background in journalism? How did you become the correspondent for the White House for Just the News?
But for God. I would have never thought, if you had told me growing up that this is where I would end up. I mean, I was an artsy fartsy kid. I loved the creative side of things. I grew up singing. I went to university for music. I ended up graduating in business because my dad gave me some really sage wisdom, which was, you can sing without a degree. It's going to be hard to do a lot of other things without a degree. So I changed my major to business, minored in music, and then I was in the music industry for 10 years in Los Angeles. And in 2016, the beginning of 2016, you grow up in life and you start realizing that there are priorities beyond whatever your personal aspirations are. And at that point, I had already, I'd had a pretty successful career in music. I had ghostwritten for a lot of household names in the pop and the hip hop industry. I was in a pop duo with another gal and we toured the country. We opened at South by Southwest. We had 2 songs on the Billboard Top 40. We had 2 songs on the Billboard Dance chart. So we did really, really well, but it was just a really gross industry. And I was not allowed to talk about certain things. Practically every music contract I had prevented me from talking about boyfriends, religion, and politics. And so in the beginning of 2016, that was when we were all staring down the business end of a boning knife known as Hillary Clinton. And I thought, you know what? I think that despite the fact that I love singing, I love many aspects of the music industry, it seemed like I should use my voice in a more impactful way. And I didn't have any background in journalism or politics or public policy or anything like that, but I always grew up, I loved knowing what was going on in the world and paying attention to political dynamics. And so that was kind of my D-Day when I realized that, that was an important time in our country. It was a very, very stark fork in the road, just like last November was. And I just felt like I should use my voice in a more impactful way. So I started a website called The Hollywood Conservative, and it was an aggregate news website. We built up a newsletter list. People would come on the website and then sign up for the newsletter, and it would drop into their inbox every day. And so that turned into another job. I was national spokesperson for one of the nation's largest super PACs. It was a pro-Trump PAC in 2016 called the Stop Hillary PAC. And then let's see, I had a terrestrial talk radio show at the time that ended up getting syndicated. And so it was just a snowball effect of a bunch of different things. And then I started a TV show. My co-host is John Solomon. He is a legendary investigative journalist who has broken stories on some of the largest scandals in political history.
Yeah.
And then John said, "Hey, why don't you come to DC and be my White House correspondent?" And I met my husband in LA. We live in LA. That's where our home base is. My husband's in the film industry, so we weren't able to just pick up our lives and me move here. But this felt like something that the Lord, gave to me as an opportunity to be salt and light in one of the darkest industries and one of the darkest cities in the world. And frankly, on the selfish side of things and the natural, I don't think that I would have done this for any other president. If I'm being completely honest, and I probably would have said, "Oh, that's not the Lord calling me to that," even if it was. But with President Trump in office, it just seems like we are it's an interesting time in politics. And let me tell you, Richard, every time to be at the White House last week, I had to be at the White House at 6:30 in the morning. My commute is an hour and 10 minutes. So I was getting up at, 4 something to be at the White House in time. And every time I am tempted to complain about it, I just think to myself, you know what? Number one, the Lord has me here for a reason.
Amen.
And number two, I get to go to the hub of power in the entire world with only a few other people any day that I want. Every day of my job, I get to go there and I get to witness what happens there, and I get to see the wheels of power turning and hopefully be an influence on these people, because, even though it's Donald Trump in the Oval Office, in that press briefing room, let me tell you, every day the enemy has a stronghold on a lot of those media organizations and a lot of those media figures. So I'm here to be salt and light and look for opportunities to do that.
That's an amazing story, actually, about how someone who loves the Lord, loves their country, and wanted to make a difference, just started doing what was in front of her, and look what it led to as God began to open doors. So fantastic. Well, Trump's been, by the time of this show, will have been in office just about 6 months, I think, Amanda. And as I look back at these last 6 months, it's been tumultuous, it's been contentious, there's been up and down and so forth, but he has already accomplished so much. It's really breathtaking, the speed at which he's been moving. What would you say, in covering the White House every day, what would you say is probably President Trump's greatest accomplishment so far in his second term?
Domestically, I think securing the border cannot be understated. Or cannot be overstated. That is a legacy that is going to have very, very long-standing implications. Protecting our border, preventing more illegal immigrants from coming into this country. And look, as a Christian, I love people. I care about people. I want people to be protected, but I also believe that a nation should have laws. And look, we know what Nehemiah did. He built a wall with a sword in the other hand. We know that and in my opinion, the way to love people, the way to love people who want to come here, is setting out clear parameters and laws for their entry into this country. And President Trump has done that. I think that is something that's going to have lasting implications, especially if this administration is able to, if they are successful in removing illegal immigrants from the census, and if not the census, at least removing them from the voter rolls, because we have seen time after time, including the 2020 election, when the conduit for A lot of shenanigans in that election, I'll just call it that. A lot of the shenanigans was, paper mail-in ballots and people voting early who didn't necessarily have driver's licenses. John Solomon and I just reported on this. John was the one who uncovered it. He found the documents where the Chinese were planning on shipping 10,000 driver's licenses to this country so that people could use those driver's licenses to then go get ballots to vote illegally. So we know that this has happened in elections in the past. It obviously reached a fever pitch in 2020. But I think that domestically, I think that far and away that is going to be his biggest legacy. Internationally, though, the Abraham Accords, the peace that President Trump has been able to broker in the Middle East is just incredible. And, I always chuckle about it because I grew up in the age of the movies of like Miss Congeniality and stuff like that. And the stereotypical answer on a pageant stage is world peace, peace in the Middle East. And it's always the reason it has been that as a joke is because so many people saw it as so unattainable. This is a cauldron of so many incompatible cultures that you have clustered right there together with Israel in the very center. And Israel, not only as our strongest ally, but as, religiously, they are our ally, obviously, but even politically. And they are the most Western culture in that country. So you look at what President Trump did in his first term with the Abraham Accords, and look what's happening now. President Trump meeting with the president of Syria. Who would have ever thought that would be the case? And now you have Syria and Lebanon, who I think will probably be the next nations to come to the table to sign on to the Abraham Accords to broker a lasting peace with the nation of Israel. It wasn't that long ago. I went to Morocco in, what was that? I think 2018. And you couldn't fly directly from Tel Aviv to Morocco because those flight paths were not open. Now they are. So peace in that region is going to be President Trump's international legacy. I think that he should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize the first time around in his first term for this, but I think now, especially with this ceasefire between Iran and Israel, that I know a lot of people were skeptical at the beginning, but it's very fragile, but it's holding so far. So I think that is it's incredibly historic. And you look at all of the past presidents who claimed that they were anti-war. I'm looking at you, Barack Obama, who acted like he was a classical liberal and said, I don't want to send more troops overseas. I want to bring troops home. And then look who it was who did it. The guy who they said, as a businessman, he doesn't know statecraft. He doesn't know diplomacy. He doesn't know foreign policy. He's going to start World War III. And look who is the guy who ended wars, brought troops back home, and is now brokering historic peace deals.
Yeah, wow, fantastic. Donald Trump got his training in the rough and tumble world of New York real estate.
That's right.
And, what better place could you be to learn how to negotiate? But, you're right, Amanda. Presidents throughout the modern era have been trying to get peace in the Middle East and have been mostly unsuccessful. Jimmy Carter got some stuff done with Egypt and Jordan, but Donald Trump is far surpassing that. What is his secret to success?
I think it's probably that business background, but also let's not let Carter off the hook, because Carter was the one who allowed the Shah to be overthrown by the Ayatollah and basically was hands off at the time and said, Shah, you're on your own. So then we had the Ayatollah, which we're still dealing with now. But I think the secret sauce for President Trump is pragmatism. Obviously New York real estate is from the outside very, very different from diplomacy. But at the same time, there's a psychological factor to both of these situations and both of these industries, let's call them. And President Trump has been a deal maker and has been someone who has been able to psychologically impress upon people his will. And it used to be in the business world. It used to be in New York and New Jersey and things like that. But now he uses that same, there are all these stories from world leaders about how, I think it was Putin or one of Putin's associates who said something to the effect of, Trump said that he was going to blow up Moscow and we thought he was kidding, but there was just like a little percent of us who we didn't know if he was kidding, because you don't know, because,
you don't know.
Quite frankly, and I think that is part of the strategy. But President Trump, I think if you distill it down to one maneuver, it's pragmatism.
hmm Well, it was Teddy Roosevelt that said, speak softly and carry a big stick. We just had to use that big stick on Iran finally after decades and decades of telling them no nukes, no nukes, no nukes. And Donald Trump finally made believers out of them. When we struck Iran in that masterful military exercise with the B-2 bombers involving deception and other stuff, the mainstream media predictably reacts with, oh, Trump, the warmonger, is going to start World War III. This is going to be terrible. Except for a tepid response from Iran with a few missiles that didn't hit their targets, the Middle East is now today a safer place. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, honestly, that weekend is a blur because it happened. The news broke on a Saturday night, and my boss called me and said, it's just me and you. We're going to have to manage all the coverage for this weekend. So I don't think either one of us got more than 8 hours of sleep combined. But what was incredible about it, and there is a lunar irony to it as well, because if you know a lot about the religion of Islam, you know what the crescent means to them religiously, but also on their flag. And one of the things that led to the success of this mission that allowed it to happen was the fact that on that night it was a waning crescent moon. And that allowed for just enough light for these aircraft to be able to see each other in very, very dim light, but so dim that you couldn't see them from the surface of the earth. And you think about that with respect to what happened, and providential things like that, just like the providential creation of this country. You see instances like that, and you see someone, and like you said, speak softly but carry a big stick. President Trump sometimes doesn't actually speak softly. He's kind of bombastic.
Right.
Including when he's trying to broker a peace deal between these two countries and they continue to blow each other up, and then President Trump has to use some adult language in the situation. But the left's reaction to this, I think, is all you need to know. I think that so often they give away their plan, they give away their desires. And the thing that was so interesting to me, and sad, frankly, is that you see something like this and true, on that Saturday, when President Trump posted on True Social that this had happened, of course, on that day, in those hours and in the coming days, we didn't know what the fallout was going to be. At that point, we didn't know what Iran's retaliation was going to look like. We can't see the future. We didn't know what was going to transpire between Israel and Iran. But you saw this sentiment emerging from Democrats and liberals that really made it seem like they were rooting against us, that they were rooting against this country. I didn't see a single one of them hail the men and women who contributed to this mission. I didn't see a single one of them even just hail the notion of peace between these two countries. And I think that just really lets you know where their mentality is, and they are consumed with hatred for Donald Trump. And this spills out into so many other areas. I was just talking with a congressman from Colorado, actually, about the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime thing. This was something that President Trump wanted, and he talked about it during his campaign. Kamala Harris, incidentally, stole that and said, oh, no, that's what I want. But now in Colorado, Democrats have passed a law that basically reverses what was passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill. The federal government said, we're not going to tax you on overtime and tips. And Colorado just passed a state law that said, oh, yeah, we are. So Democrats have such a hatred for Donald Trump and everything that he does that even in something that is wildly popular, everyone has seen the polling on things like this. Everyone knows that no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security they are wildly popular policies. But because Democrats have such a hatred for Trump and they so desire to oppose him at every turn that it puts them in really uncomfortable positions a lot of the time, supporting Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man who in fact is an El Salvador man who was domiciled in Maryland, who had a recidivistic behavior when it came to, allegedly recidivistic behavior when it came to being a wife beater and a human trafficker and things like this. But Democrats so desire to dunk on Donald Trump that they end up supporting these things that I think 10 years ago we never would have seen. I mean, everyone has seen these clips of Barack Obama supporting strong immigration policies.
Yeah, and
And,
Hillary even.
if you
Yeah.
go out to your average liberal on the street and you read them a quote from Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or even Al Gore, someone like that, Joe Biden from his days in the Senate or as vice president, you read them a quote and they just assume it's Donald Trump and that it's racist. And it's like, no, actually, this is where the country has always been when it comes to immigration. Come on in, sign the guest book, a big wall, but a nice big door. Register when you come in. We want you here, but you have to assimilate.
Wow, that's really well said, Amanda. Um, the whole thing about Hillary or Kamala taking credit for the no tax on tips thing. For some reason, I flash back to McDonald's and remember she claimed to work at McDonald's, but in fact,
Right.
Donald Trump is the only one who really did. His 15 minutes in the drive-through window was longer than her entire career at McDonald's. So,
Can you imagine a president's resume saying former McDonald's employee?
yeah, yeah. But, so much to talk about in terms of Trump's legacy. One of the things that has not yet materialized tragically is peace for the Ukraine and Russia. And it's hard to know if that will come about anytime soon. Of course, at some point it will, but is the Trump administration still actively working to bring about peace there?
Trying to remember what I'm allowed to say. Yes, obviously, President Trump is always hands-on when it comes to any type of global conflict that involves the United States. I think that President Trump, because of his prior relationship in his first term with Vladimir Putin, is looking to Putin to kind of lead any type of lasting ceasefire between the two countries. Unfortunately, it has become apparent that when President Trump focuses his energy on something like Israel and Iran, that Putin has the attitude that when the cat's away, the mice will play, and he continues to bombard Ukraine. Now, I'm one of these folks who I am not supportive of 100 and what are we up to now at this point? At least $170 billion worth of aid going to Ukraine. This is not a conflict that I think would have seeped out beyond these two nations. There are a lot of people who acted like this was going to progress westward all the way to the ocean. And I'm not one of these people who thinks that Russians would end up making fish and chips in Great Britain. I happen to think that this would have been contained between the two countries. But here we are in a situation where, this started under Joe Biden. It wouldn't have started under Donald Trump. Donald Trump is going to be forced to make sure that this is finished because and this goes back to President Trump's pragmatism. What did he continue to say on the campaign trail? People constantly were trying to goad him into answering questions about who specifically he would support, if he would give money, if he would give military aid and firepower. And he just said, I just want the killing to stop. I want people to stop dying. And I don't think that mentality has changed for him at all. If there is a role for him to play in making sure that this happens, which when we consider the negotiator that he is on the world stage, I mean, look at how quickly he was able to quash what happened in Kashmir between India and Pakistan. I mean, it was literally days that President Trump was able to make that happen. He calls up Modi, calls up the leaders in Pakistan and says, cut it out. And they do. Obviously, Putin is not that. He is a much more recalcitrant leader to deal with. But I think that President Trump is ultimately going to have success in this. I would imagine by the fall, if I'm being honest. That's what my projection would be.
Yeah, well, we're all hoping and praying for that. Well, one of the definitely major accomplishments, I think you'd agree, was what happened just recently with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And I did a show on this and an analysis of it. It's really interesting. It was down to the wire. And of course, once again, mainstream media, hand-wringing, Republicans are divided, they're not going to get it done. But Donald Trump and Mike Johnson, some help by John Thune, I think, got it over the finish line. How big of an accomplishment is this bill, actually?
It is definitely...
This law.
The of the bill, I think, is less of an accomplishment than President Trump being able to work through all of those relationships in the House and the Senate to make it happen. I think that's the accomplishment. And I think that shows, that this was an accomplishment for Donald Trump, but make no mistake, if Republicans in the House were not able to get this done, it would have been apocalyptic for them in the midterms because, the approval ratings on Capitol Hill, regardless of party, are abysmally low. And, last November, the American people gave a mandate to Republicans. They gave a mandate to Donald Trump. They gave President Trump the White House. President Trump won the popular vote. They flipped the Senate and they kept the House. That to me should have sent a stronger message to the House of Representatives. Now, Mike Johnson, I think it took him a while to get his sea legs under him, but I was quite impressed with how he was able to congeal this effort to get this passed. The biggest accomplishment in this bill by far is making sure that the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was made permanent, because that is something that as soon as the American people started to feel the effects of that, Republicans would have lost. And I believe, I talked to a number of people.
You mean if it had not stayed in place?
If it had gone away, if this bill had not been passed and they had not been made permanent, the American people would have felt that. And they could have felt it as soon as their next tax cycle when they had to pay. And you know who Americans are going to hold responsible for that, even if it was Democrats who largely held it up. Republicans are in the majority. The Republicans would get blamed. So President Trump, this is an accomplishment for him for many reasons, but also because, if President Trump is able to keep the House in the midterms, that effectively doubles the life of the amount of time that he has for accomplishments. Because in any one term for a president, you think about especially a first term for a president, the first 2 years of the honeymoon, and then you spend the last part of that campaigning for the midterm so that you're not a lame duck, and then the second term is typically smooth sailing if you have a majority in both of the houses.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Trump has signed, I think in his first 100 days alone, he had already signed, I think, 4 times as many executive orders as Joe Biden in his first 100 days, and 6 times more than Obama and that sort of thing. So really incredible. He was ready to go. And
Roosevelt.
Since Roosevelt in the 1930s. So he was loaded for bear, and what an impact those are having. And you mentioned the lawsuits, 240 something lawsuits against Donald Trump, his agenda. The Supreme Court finally is stepping up and smacking some of this stuff down. I think they held that no nationwide injunctions and a few other holdings that are really helpful, I think. But
absolutely.
But yeah, that's great. Well, in this big, beautiful bill, one of the things that was interesting to me is conservatives in the House and in the Senate, but especially in the House, were saying it doesn't cut far enough. It doesn't solve the deficit. Elon Musk is beside himself about this issue, starting a third party, for Pete's sake. Trump said this thing's going to cut the deficit by $5 trillion, $6 trillion over 10 years. Congressional Budget Office, though, said no, it's going to increase the deficit by $3 trillion. Who's right on this, Amanda?
Yeah, so CBO is viewed supposedly as nonpartisan. I beg to differ.
They're supposed to be, yeah.
It's supposed to be, exactly. They are allegedly nonpartisan, but the way that they arrive at these conclusions, their methodology is not set in stone. So they can decide to include tariff revenue. They can decide not to include tariff revenue. But, I think, and I get this question a lot. How can a budget bill increase the deficit while decreasing the debt? And it's no different from a business who needs to make an investment in order to make more money. If a business needs to automate and they are trying to become more productive through automation, it costs money to purchase that equipment. So they may end up having to blow a ton of money within 1 year and exceed their budgetary restrictions. But that automation will ultimately pay off, not only in a reduced workforce and therefore reduced payroll, but an increase in production itself. So that's kind of the way I look at it, and it's the way that I explain it to people when that happens. And that's what we're seeing here. I remember during President Trump's first term, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act first went into effect, the amazing statistic was that Americans were paying less in taxes. We knew that. You can look at the percentages across the each of the tax brackets, regardless of Democrats continuously shrieking, it's tax cuts for the rich. But you looked at those tax brackets, and every bracket benefited, but middle class and lower class Americans benefited even more than upper class Americans. At the same time, so Americans are paying less in taxes, but the IRS brought in more revenue than the previous year. And why is that? Because more Americans were back in the workforce. So all of these factors play a role. President Trump I was trying to bring up the tweet before we came to air. President Trump just put this out a little while ago. Tech stocks, industrial stocks, and NASDAQ hit all-time record highs. Crypto through the roof. Nvidia is up 47% since Trump tariffs. USA is taking in hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs. Country is now back a great credit. Fed should rapidly lower rate to reflect this strength. USA should be at the top of the list, no inflation. So you look at the inflationary aspect of our economy, that, unemployment was much better than it was under Joe Biden. It's still, President Trump will admit, it's still not where he wants it to be. But all of these factors that play into driving an economy, I mean, he mentioned it in this, NVIDIA. So I was just talking to Congressman Andy Biggs yesterday, and we were talking about how in the Department of Job Creation, Arizona is near the bottom. But NVIDIA is one of these companies investing in the United States. They are bringing their chips manufacturing to the state of Arizona, and it's going to create thousands of jobs. If that is not an on-the-ground practical result, a tangible result from President Trump going overseas, talking to world leaders, and getting them to invest in the United States, if that is not a positive result that you can see and feel and touch and experience, then I don't know what is. And I think that ultimately for the American people, that's why they voted for him. They see what's happening on the news. They see the media telling them that, President Trump hates immigrants. They always conveniently leave out the word illegal. But they
don't even, they call them migrants now, right?
Migrants,
you can't,
right.
Not even, now they're migrants.
Undocumented. Okay. But the American people know that. I mean, you look at it wasn't the 4th of July, Memorial Day. Memorial Day, the previous record for Americans who were traveling was, I think, 44.5 million, and it went up again. And this is Donald Trump. This is the guy who they said he was going to tank the economy with the tariffs, and yet a record number of Americans traveled. And it's not necessarily because people are already, swimming in their wealth. It's because of the optimism. It is because the American people remember what President Trump did the first time around, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, I might not necessarily like his personality. I might not necessarily like the things that he says, but the mean tweets have actually produced some really good results for the American people. And when you can pay your grocery bills, and when you can pay your gas bill, and when you can go on a vacation, you can put your kids in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, that makes up for a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got a few minutes left, Amanda. I want to ask you about the culture issues under the Trump administration. Now, the economy is a biblical issue. I keep saying that, but it kind of helps to separate them a little bit here. The One Big Beautiful Bill miraculously cancels Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood. What an incredible achievement that is for the cause of life. But Trump has also just been a wrecking ball when it comes to DEI, the LGBT ideology in the federal government, in our colleges and universities. How important to our future as a nation is this push by Donald Trump to restore sanity and traditional American principles and biblical values?
Yeah, so on the issue of abortion, so we had these two things that happened at the same time, both moving in the direction of life, which was really wonderful to see. We had this South Carolina case that ended up at the Supreme Court that dealt with the issue of Medicaid reimbursements, and then you had the federal funding issue in the One Big Beautiful Bill that said no more. I don't think people realize this, that much of Planned Parenthood's funding, it's not direct tax dollars. It is a reimbursement for expenses through the vehicle of Medicaid. So when you wipe out the Medicaid reimbursements, that effectively nullifies any type of federal aid that they are getting. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that there are a bunch of crazy liberals out there who are intent on keeping Planned Parenthood afloat, who are going to donate to the organization, and this is where I'm kind of stretched thin right in the middle, because as a believer, I 100% believe in life, but also believe in states' rights. And unfortunately, we're in a fallen world, and there are states who are going to fight to keep what they can. That doesn't mean that we should not fight in the other direction in those states. If you live in a state that allows abortion, you should fight like heck to reverse that and to stand for life in your state. But President Trump, it's been incredible to see. He was the first president ever in his first term to show up and speak at the March for Life. So that shows you where his priorities are. On the DEI thing, Richard, this is incredible. I was driving into DC this morning and I passed a church, and they had a sign out front that said DEI is holy.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, even if you sidestep the theological and the biblical and the scriptural argument about that, why? Why at a church? Why are you talking about DEI? It's utterly nonsensical. And, you know, the telling thing, and there's been a meme about this floating out there. If DEI is so good, then why do people get so mad when you accuse someone of being a DEI hire? It's when you place the importance of, you know, that you would hire someone on an immutable characteristic. You know, I have blonde highlights. Does that mean that I should get a certain job? Absolutely not. You know, I know that there are a lot of blondes in media. That's not why I got the highlights. But, you know, when you place the importance on things that either don't matter or are unchangeable, like gender, or the color of someone's skin, or the state that they are from, or anything else, you are degrading your own company, your own organization, whatever it is. And it's heartbreaking to see so many people think that DEI is a good thing. I think, Richard, that I don't necessarily know how we got here culturally, where people think that, you know, your SAT scores and your ACT scores shouldn't matter. You know, with our home base in California, I am unfortunately intimately aware of how those things don't matter in California, especially in the public schools. So you have a record number of kids in these schools who can't do math, can't read at grade level. And then they end up graduating, and then they go to college because they have a certain color skin, and then they end up failing out because they don't have the skills. We are damaging an entire generation of young people, and it's heartbreaking. But you know what? The truth is going to hit them in the face, and it's going to hurt really bad. But hopefully they will figure out that, you know, studying, having merit, having skills, working hard, those are the things that are important, and not these immutable things.
Amanda, unfortunately, we are up against the clock here and kind of out of time, but what a pleasure and joy it's been to have you on Truth and Liberty today. Tell everybody where they can find your work and follow you and everything else.
Sure. So you can find me on social media at Amanda Head, spelled just like your head, H-E-A-D. The podcast, my podcast is called Furthermore with Amanda Head. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms, and you can actually go to furthermorepod.com, and it's a one-stop shop for all of the articles that I write, my podcast, social media links, all of that good stuff. So head there.
And Just the News, what's the website for Just the News?
JustTheNews.com. We have an incredible team of writers here, an incredible team of reporters, and you can find all of our reporting at JustTheNews.com. And then John Solomon and I host our nightly news show at 6 p.m. Eastern on Real America's Voice.
Oh, fantastic. So good to have you on the show today, Amanda. God bless you and all you do, and we got to have you back soon. Everybody, thanks for watching Truth and Liberty today. Be sure to tune in next time, and we look forward to having you with us then.